pride in that. When my book on 3 Mile Island, okay, I'm going to brag, okay? When my book on 3 Mile Island came out, it was published with a full-page review in Science magazine, and the first line of that review was, "This is a superb book." It made it easy to read the rest of the review. But I was told, and I have no reason to doubt it, that people at the NRC tacked that review to their bulletin boards, because that was something that they took pride in. So I've gone beyond your question, but the answer is yes, I had great support, and it really gave me a lot of incentive to do the best I could do. Yes.
I'm just going to stand. I'm
Okay.
John Longquist. I'm a historian with the Corps of Engineers. You mentioned that you were on the Secretary's staff. Talk a little bit about where your office was positioned and how important access was, or what kind of access you had, and how important that was to your program's success.
Yeah, I think it's really important. The Office of the Secretary at the NRC and in other agencies as well coordinates the activities of the commissioner, so it's right up at the top level of the agency. And the Office of Secretary does scheduling and voting and just all kinds of things to try to ensure that the NRC runs smoothly. It doesn't always succeed in that, but being a part of that office was very important, because when a new commissioner came on, I always made a point of going up, introducing myself, giving him or her copies of my books, and making certain that they knew that I was around. And if I had been lower on the staff, I wouldn't have had that access and that privilege. So I think the fact that the commissioners knew who I was and knew what I was doing and knew what I had done, I think that was extraordinarily important. And it's something that we all should strive for. And it's harder, I'm sure, with larger organizations. The NRC is a pretty small agency, about 3,000. So in that sense, it's closer knit, and people, if they don't know each other personally, they do know a lot more about the internal workings of the agency than often is true in a larger agency. Phil.
Sam, what should the role of the Society of History and the federal government be in advocating for historical offices and agencies that either A, haven't filled them, or B, don't have?
You know, I think we're out of time here now. Very early in the life of the Society, I was a chairman of a committee of which, the name of which I've forgotten. I'm not sure I knew it at the time, so it's okay. And one of our functions was to try to expand the number of history offices in the federal government. And so a couple times I met with agency officials, and I talked to them about the practical value of history, and always got a very nice reception. But it's tough, and we have to, as a society, avoid becoming a lobbying organization. I think that has more drawbacks than advantages. So I think what we have to do, and I don't know what structure is now of SHFG, I think we have to be aware of opportunities when they arise. I think it's good to publicize what we do, and I think we should have people who are able, I know that Dick Baker did this a couple times when he was president, and I'm sure that other presidents did too, of go and talk to agencies which had expressed some interest in terms of what we can do to encourage agencies that don't have offices and haven't thought about it. I'm at a loss on that one, and especially at a time when we're facing cutbacks, it's not a propitious time. So I think we need to do all we can do, but I think we have to recognize there's a limit to what we can do. NRC established a history office because the AEC had one, and the AEC, of course, had a splendid history program run by Dick Hewlett. So when the NRC was split off from the AEC, it was natural for the NRC to establish a history program.
Greg Martin, I'm from the Naval History and Heritage Command, and it's kind of like a history office program manager. I'm involved in almost an annual knife fight with the budget managers within the Office of Chief of Naval Operations that are trying to decide, do we spend money on ships and airplanes and submarines for history books? And that's a lot of times how they kind of characterize it. And I think perhaps one of the challenges is that in terms of better articulating our argument of the value of what we're doing, and I really appreciate the lecture that you provided and really kind of getting at that issue of what is the practical value of history and history offices to the federal government. How can we maybe engage with the Academy, or at least with public history programs, to maybe do some more research on the efficacy, really kind of document and possibly even show some connections economically to how these history programs can either de-risk some of the decisions that are made, or how they can actually make some economic impact in terms of what's the value of a good decision versus what's the value of a bad decision based on how historically informed that decision is. So just curious about your comment.
Yeah, it's a great question, and of course there is no single answer. I'm not sure there's a good answer. But it seems to me, based on my experiences, and for when Ron Spector was with CMH, and he did an article in the early 1980s at the time that we sent troops to Lebanon, and he was talking about why American troops were eating sea rations in Lebanon. And this was because in 1957 they had gone there and they had enjoyed the fabulous restaurants of Beirut, and in huge numbers they got sick. So when they went back in the early 1980s, they weren't allowed to do that. So if you have an example like that, and usually one good one will carry the day, at least it certainly strengthens your position. In terms of quantifying how historical knowledge can benefit versus a lack of historical knowledge, I don't know, except to try to give examples, examples of what happened when people ignored history, and that's not easy to do. And there are no easy answers, and that's why we're at a disadvantage when we have to argue against people who say, well, we don't need a historian, we need a technical expert, or we need a battleship kind of thing, and it's benefits which are harder to see against something that's very easy to see. And so I don't have any great answers except as you go along, make notes of, or make certain that you're aware of. Write little essays about this is something that we did as a historical office that benefited in the agency. This, I believe, is my successor, Tom Wellick, and Tom, I'm afraid, is going to take issue with what I've just said.
Hi, I'm Tom Wellick. Yes, I'm Sam Walker now, and I wanted to throw in one other plug for the value of Sam's books at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Is that I think it's important that agencies understand that having a critical voice within the agency is of tremendous value. I'll just provide one example from 3 Mile Island. A person who was in the nuclear industry wrote a letter to the NRC demanding that the chairman apologize for the NRC's performance over the years, that the NRC admit that the reactor operators that day were not at fault, as the NRC claimed, and that it was really the NRC's and the industry's general fault that the accident had happened. And so this letter to the chairman of the NRC wound up on my desk to answer. And I was able to write back and say, I don't agree with the premise of your statement. The NRC has been very critical of itself regarding its performance at 3 Mile Island. And how do we know this? well, please read Sam Walker's book on this. And, you know, the NRC, you know, has engaged in a great deal of self-criticism. That's important for federal agencies to do, and Sam did that for 30 years. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Tom. I did not ask him to say that. I would have if I'd known. Any other questions? I don't know how we're doing for time.
Sam,
Yes.
Can I give you
Leanne.
an opportunity to brag a little bit more?
Yeah, and let me introduce Leanne, who was the chairman of the committee that established the Trask Awards.
So I want you to brag about that.
Okay,
And
so
then
brag
also,
away.
the first question about what it's like when you're alone. That group was a reflection of collegiality that the society fosters in ways that you guys were an absolute demonstration of that. So brag all you want.
I thought you were going to brag about yourself, which would have been a nice change of pace. Yeah. It was, and Roger had died recently, so a number of us got together and decided that we should have an award to honor Roger, and this is what came from that, and I think it's been a wonderful institution, present company accepted. But if you look at the people who have given this lecture through the years, the first one was in 2009, it's really a great list of outstanding historians, and I think it's a reflection of the kind of talent we have in the federal history community. And I think the Trask lecture, in no small measure to Leanne and her efforts, is a good way to publicize that fact.
So I got to elaborate. So these
Okay.
guys came to one of our executive committee meetings, and like Sam said, Roger had recently passed away. And the group of them that came demonstrated such respect for their colleague and such admiration for their colleague's work, and a real desire to make sure that the work of their friend and the larger federal history community had an ongoing presence within this organization and at this meeting. And honestly, in my entire career, I've never seen anything quite like it. And there's an awful lot to be said for recognizing the talents and the commitment of our colleagues, and I think that is really a tenet of this organization. And the guys who came to that meeting absolutely reflected that. And some of you are here who should be patting yourselves on the back.
Thank you, Leanne. And thank you all. I think we've exhausted our time. Thank you very much.
So I'd like to congratulate and thank Dr. Walker once again for delivering such a thoughtful and timely lecture. I think that once we get a version of it published in our journal, it could be required reading for federal managers that have to decide whether or not to fund history programs. We have a little bit of time before the next sessions begin. If the sessions that are not in the theater are going to be 2 floors up. So if you go out of the theater and turn to the right, they'll be up the stairs that way. We'll have somebody out there to show you where to go. In the meantime, there's coffee and pastry still outside, and our book sale, or it's not a sale, our federal regulation, our book, what are we calling it? Donation is now open out in the lobby here. We can't have a transaction in the National Archives. So if you would like a book, you're welcome to take one. There is a form inside that suggests you give a donation, which you can do online. Other than that, I think Ben Guterman, who does our publications, brought a bunch of samples of our newsletter, journal, and things like that. Those are out on the registration table. You're welcome to take a look at that. And once again, welcome everybody, and thank you for coming.